Coming up in today's episode.
It's so beautiful when you talk to yourself like this because it's exactly how you would talk to somebody that you really, really care about.
Welcome to episode 89 of Enter the Mind podcast, the most real talk, no nonsense podcast on the empowering of the mind. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about knowing yourself and improving your life as a result. So, Kyra, why don't we launch into this topic? What made you think of knowing yourself and improving your life?
Well, there was a topic that's been coming up for the past 2 days, and it's about how when our elders were younger, they would, be forced to eat everything that's on their plate, even if they didn't like it. They would be like, oh, well, I don't care if you don't like it, you have to finish it. I don't care if you're full, you have to finish it. And we started talking deeper into the topic, and I realized that it comes up to not knowing yourself well enough as you grow up. Because number one, in that time, in that era, adults were programmed to eat something even if they don't like it, to take something even if they don't like it, to be polite and accept a gift even if they don't fucking like it. And when you're programming people like that, nobody knows who the fuck they are. They're like, I'm just going to take this because somebody told me to, because I'm supposed to finish what's on my plate, because I'm supposed to take something that's for free, even if I don't fucking want it, right? So then, all of our adults, are programmed like this, and then they're teaching us to think like this, in lack mindset, in mindset of being untrue to yourself while following somebody else's rules. It's like, bitch, if I don't want to be polite, I don't have to be polite. This is my rules now. And I feel like this is something that we need to remember in today's society, and to remember to actually come back to yourself instead of using that programming where you're eating shit that you don't like, where you're accepting shit that you don't like. The devil could come up and hand you an opportunity, and say, here, you can come and work for me. It's fucking free. I'm going to pay you well. And because you don't know yourself well enough, you don't know the world well enough, you don't know your mission well enough, you're going to take the fucking opportunity because you don't know where the fuck you're going. And maybe that's a little triggering, and I get it, but it's definitely something that you need to hear, because it's a hard truth, and you really gotta figure out who you are.
Yeah, that was super deep, and that was a mound of gold that we need to start picking apart. So let's dissect this here. Well, the first thought that I had was, of course, our parents and their generation did not go through the Great Depression, but their parents did. And so I can imagine my parents at the dinner table and their parents, meaning my grandparents, telling them, you got to finish your full plate. And then they got that conditioning. They pass it on to us. And I kid you not, the other day I was asking myself, why am I trying to finish my full dinner right now? I'm full. Like, why am I feeling compelled to clear my entire plate? So what you pointed out is just so killer, because you're getting at the mindset, the mentality, this invisible thing that is oppressing everybody from expressing their true selves. And I don't know if you would just call it conformity or conformity conditioning or what, but there's definitely, I'm understanding, I think, what you're saying, that the result of this is that people, they're not freely being themselves because they're just following these conditioned habits. Is that what you're expressing?
That's definitely what I'm expressing. What I also wanted to say is that with the whole food thing, number one, I get that. So I get that, like, our parents, their parents went through the Great Depression. So I get it, yeah, maybe during that time, eat all that's on your fucking plate, bro. Like, there ain't shit. There ain't jack shit. You really got to eat this. Like, I need you to be nourished, right? So I get that. But, like, we're not in the Great Depression anymore. So why are these still being carried down? Number one, it's a feeling of familiarity. Number two, it's a feeling of almost like wisdom. Our elders think that, they're like, oh, well, this went on back in my day, and it makes me feel great to talk about it and to teach it to you, because it makes me feel familiar. It makes me feel like I've been through something, like I know something, right? So on top of that,
On top of that, our portions are so fucking big. Why do you think Americans are so fucking fat? Why? Because our portions are gigantic, number one. And then number two, we have that thing in our minds that says, I have to finish my plate because it's bad to waste food, right? So
Right.
nobody wants to waste food. So we're eating this excess amount of food. But if we could just cut down our portions, everything would be fine. We would be eating normal amounts. We would be nourished. We wouldn't be acting in gluttony or greediness. I feel like it's like that mindset that's carried on from maybe like the Great Depression, and ancestors and stuff that follows down from that lack. So then it's almost like since there was so much lack, we begin to act in gluttony and we begin to take even when we don't need.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because what the parents should have said is like, well, when I was young, we had to finish everything on our plate because we were in the middle of a Great Depression. But that was then, and this is now. So just want you to be aware, you don't have to finish everything on your plate. But if we were in a depression, you would want to finish everything on your plate. Like that's awareness,
Yeah.
that times change. And then if you're behaving the same way you behaved 30 years ago, you're not aware of changing times.
Yeah, and then you're stuck in this past frame of mind and we're bringing it all into the present, right? So then couldn't we say that if we actually knew who we were and we stopped, we kind of took a moment to like take a breath and take a look at everything that we believe, like all around us, like there's like this little circle around our minds of everything that we believe and everything that we've been taught, right? And it's like, okay, this is great. Now, what of these do I actually agree with? Do I actually agree that I should eat everything on my plate? And if I do, why do I believe that? Do I believe it because it was passed down to me? Do I believe it because I believe that there's a lack? When you know yourself, you can then know the opportunities that are placed in front of you. It's like why people join cults, because they don't know who the fuck they are. They're lonely. They're sad. They don't know what's going the fuck on in this world. Finally, they come across these people who are so fucking nice, so fucking inviting, but because they don't know themselves well enough, they can't see who these people are. They don't know well enough because they don't know themselves and they don't know the world. So they wind up taking an opportunity that is literally driving them to fucking death, which is pretty much death is like when you don't know anything about yourself. You're dead. You're dying. And then when you begin to know yourself, you awaken to life.
Right. What I'm seeing is that there's a difference between wisdom and dogmatism. Wisdom, true wisdom, is, I would say, cause and effect. It's little boy, little girl, this is what you should do. Because if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you do that, that's what's going to happen. Cause and effect. Versus dogmatism is little boy, little girl, you should do this. Period. End of thought. Like why should I do that?
Yeah.
What do you mean? And of course that also gets into the cult stuff, right? Where if people are not thinking cause and effect, they're just thinking, oh well, the leader told me to do this or the leader told me to do that.
The leader.
But I want to get to this. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying about the sense of self. So you're saying when they don't know themselves, that's when they fall into these patterns?
Yes.
I'm at the 10x growth conference, right? And I don't really know myself yet. I kind of just heard about this 10x growth conference, so I'm going. I'm just kind of talking to people, I'm meeting people, and these people need other people, right? They need other people. They're looking for people, right? They came here with a fucking goal. They know who they are, possibly, and they need people. So they're looking, right? I want to start my own business, but like I don't really know how to. I'm just, here at this fucking 10x growth conference. So because I don't know myself well enough, one, because I don't know my mission well enough, two, because I don't know how the world works well enough, three, I fall into somebody else's work line. So now somebody has hired me to build their dream, and my dream is put on hold because I think that this is possibly the right decision for me. Somebody's handed me a job. It's for free. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know why I came to 10X. But look, I kind of wanted to start my own business. But look, this person just handed me a gold fucking platter. I have it all set up for me. I'm getting paid a bunch of money. I'm helping these people grow their business. But now look, now I'm completely strung into something that is not true to myself.
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. That's somebody handing you a mission right there. That's not yours.
Yeah.
And then you're going to work on it.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine if that's what you came to 10X to do. If you knew yourself and you said, I want to work for somebody. I don't know fucking who, but somebody's looking for somebody. They're going to find me and I want to work for them. And then you get it, and you get a whole bunch of offers, right? So it even can come down like minutely to this. Like, so now in another scenario, why you came to 10X. You want to work for somebody, right? Now you have all of these opportunities. You've got like 5 opportunities and you still don't know which one to pick because you still don't know yourself well enough. So you may know yourself kind of well, but not well enough because now you have all of these opportunities and you wind up picking the wrong one because you didn't map out your target.
Yeah, if you don't have that direction, then you're going to accept the sort of the first direction that somebody else gives you.
Exactly that. So then, what are the ways that you've learned to know yourself?
Well, that's a good question. I've always been independent, and it was funny that I got mad in the 4th grade when my parents signed me up for Boy Scouts. Another year when that was the year when it was becoming uncool. So all of the kids were like quitting, and we were in the car and they told me, oh, by the way, we signed you up for another year. And I went off on them. I was like this little 4th grader. I was like, don't ever sign me up for something unless I tell you to sign me up for it. Yeah. So I've been independent for all my life. But as for this question of how have I known what I really wanted? Well, I always tell this story of I was a computer science major and math. That's what I was studying in college, computer science and math. And I got an internship at a big Fortune 500 company making good money. But I was sitting at a desk 8 hours a day in this fake building in my fake box cubicle and doing these fake reports, like looking out the window the entire day, just thinking like, I want to work in the inner city. I want to work with kids. I want to work with people. I want to help the less fortunate. I want to help people actually live life and not help some company manufacture more widgets. And I quit. Well, I completed the internship, but I quit my major of computer science. I switched to psychology, right? And I never turned back. And I've spent the last 10 years helping the homeless, working with kids in the inner city, like working with people with mental illnesses and helping them become more stable. And I've learned in the course of that, I've learned so much about human nature, which to me is invaluable. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But I think it comes down to listening to yourself. I don't know. It was just, and I don't know if this results from just not having quality listeners around us as we grow up, because you remember when we interviewed Eddie Caparucci, psychologist, and he was talking about when fictitious, little Johnny goes next door and plays with the neighbor, and then the neighbor breaks his Nerf gun and he comes back and he tells his dad, hey, Billy broke my gun. And the dad gets angry and goes, well, why'd you give your gun to Billy? Why'd you let him do that? You shouldn't let him do that. Instead of like listening, be, okay, well, how do you feel about that? Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think should be done? Mm-hmm. Right? That sort of neutral questioning would develop little Johnny's sense of like self-direction and like checking in with himself, being like, wait, how do I feel about this?
Yeah. When you are giving your response or reaction to the child,
I guess that's not so horrible because, we all have our reactions and our responses, but it's when you tell them and then the kid, not knowing any better, this is daddy, this is mommy and daddy, as far as I know fucking best. So if my daddy says, that's horrible, why did you give your toy to him in the fucking first place. Like, this is horrible. Now the little boy, little Johnny in his head has automatically, now that, like, hey, I don't want to give my toys to anybody else. It's a bad idea. Don't trust other people with my things, and then they create experiences like that. So, like, if little Johnny, gives a toy to somebody else again, maybe he's going to attract the same type of person who is going to break his fucking toy just so he can live on through that self-belief, that belief about life and other people. What I wanted to say about you was, okay, so when you got into computer science, when you went to major in computer science, it seemed that you kind of took like something that was on the table. You did computer science and you did the internship, and then you were like, hold on. Like the real you was coming through, like the actual you was coming through, was like, hey, this doesn't really look like where I want to be, which is really cool because that sense of self, that sense of knowing yourself came through almost involuntarily. And you were like, okay, well, I'm going to, switch into psychology because I know myself. This is boring. I am not happy. I'm going to go to something that's going to make me happier. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think it gets to the word dialogue, inner dialogue, because I was thinking about this the other day, that die means two, right? So dialogue, if you talk about your internal dialogue, that means there's more than one voice going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true because I can imagine sitting at that desk 10 plus years ago, and part of me was saying, like, this work is pointless. Like, this report they just asked me to type up for them, like, they're not going to use this report. But then part of me was like, but this is how I earn money. This is how I'm an adult. And then the other part of me came back and said, but there's more meaningful work out there that I could be doing. And so there was this internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think maybe part of it is how good are we at facilitating that inner dialogue versus shutting it down. Because if a voice inside of you is saying something, like, you got to listen to it. You don't have to blindly obey it, just like we don't need to blindly obey people on the external telling us to do things. We also don't have to blindly obey our voices internally. But I think we should foster some dialogue because the insights will come out of that conversation.
I completely agree with that. I remember the first time that I transcribed like an actual conversation with myself in my head. And it was when I was in Indonesia. And it was after I had gone through my ESMS, my whole self-mastery program. So I had already mastered myself and allowing like new information to come in that would help me continue to master myself, to continue to have this feeling of I know myself. So I was listening to the voices in my head one day and one evening, and they were talking to me, and I was talking to myself, and I was like, well, I'm really hurt. And I was like, well, why are you hurt? And the other part of me was like, well, you kind of left me for dead. Like, you just don't listen to me. I have all of these amazing ideas. I have all of these beautiful things. Oh God, it's getting me worked up. And, you don't listen to me. And I was like, well, I'm so sorry for that. I didn't mean to not listen to you, and it's so beautiful when you talk to yourself like this, because it's exactly how you would talk to somebody that you really, really care about. Like, hey, you hurt me. And it's like, I hurt you? Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to, so that inner dialogue is definitely something that can help you understand what you're going through if you really allow yourself to open up. And I think that the biggest problem that people have with this today is not feeling safe enough within themselves to allow that dialogue to go off. They feel anxious. Maybe they feel like something's coming for them. So like they can't relax inside themselves enough to let that inner dialogue talk. Number one, because they don't know themselves well enough. Number two, because they don't know the world well enough. And number three, because they don't have that foundation that's safe enough inside themselves because they haven't created it.
Yeah. I mean, I can see and I can hear that this is striking a chord in you, or that it was moving, right? There's a high flow of energy coming from your memory of those stories. I've had very similar experience, right? It happened during a therapy session where I was talking with a therapist, and I think a good therapist can really pull that out of you, right? A good therapist who's neutral, who knows how to be neutral, because a lot of therapists, I think, don't know how to be neutral. In the inside, internally, they're tearing their hair out while you're telling your story, and they're trying to keep it together. But a really good therapist, like, genuinely is like, oh, okay, cool. Like, so what does the other part of you say, right?
Yeah.
And that neutrality, like you were saying, allows for a safe place for you to have that dialogue. I mean, I always encourage people to try therapy, but you got to try a lot. I mean, I'm talking about that one guy that I had the really good experience with. That was one out of like 8 or 9 that I've tried
Yeah.
throughout my life, right? Through employee benefits, things. But if you can find a neutral therapist, like, score, because that's your soul needs that, right? Or any sort of listener. It doesn't have to be a licensed therapist. It could, but a neutral listener will really do that. And it's so true. Like, I think a lot of people are torn between the various parts of themselves. Like, one part of them really, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche example, but let's say a person truly is an artist, and then their parents are like, you need to be an accountant or a lawyer or something, right? And that clearly is a pull in 2 different directions. And that person needs to have that internal dialogue happen. That conversation needs to happen inside of them. Well, I want to honor my parents. I love my parents, yes. On the other hand, this is what I also love myself. And this is what I really need for myself. And see, there's no clear, it's not like one party's wrong, the other party's right. It's a dialogue that needs to happen, and some sort of creative solution, some sort of synthesis will come out of that.
Yeah, and I feel like nobody ever has that dialogue, I guess, in their heads to be able to ask, like, oh, is this what I really want? And you see it in, like, relationships. You see it, like, with, like, sex and everything. These women are having sex with these men and giving themselves to these men. Why? Because they don't know what's best for themselves. They're chasing exterior things because nobody has taught them to chase the interior things that make up who they are. So there are these little high school girls who are caught up in these relationships with these boys who call them at 3 a.m. on a weekend to hang out and have sex in a car. And then the girl is like falling in love with him because she's so desperate for a human connection, for somebody to love her and make her feel like she's loved. Like, oh, this person is in my corner kind of thing. Like, oh, well, this person calls me at 3 a.m. to have sex in the car. I love him, And the reason why, we're getting into these relationships, it always comes down to not knowing yourself well enough, because you're so desperate for something. You're so desperate for a direction. You're so desperate for a connection that you're taking almost anything you can get. Like, you're desperate to fall in line and be accepted by a specific group of people. But when you finally are accepted by that group of people, you will only come to find that it was you that needed to accept you. And there's no group of people in the world that you can fall in line with that will accept you and make you feel accepted is if you don't accept and know yourself. So I just feel like, yeah, it just all comes down to knowing who you are and like falling into like the wrong tribe, like falling into a cult or falling into just a group of people that you thought were cool, but little did you know that you started hanging out with them because you had this value deep inside of you that said, I value relationships where I am not valued. I value relationships where I value them a lot more than they value me, and I value that. For some reason, I don't know why I value it, but I do.
So I'm going to go after these group of people. So if you don't know your values, if you don't know your morals, if you don't know what you believe in, if you don't know what pisses you off, you're going to fall into somewhere that you don't belong, that does not make you happy, that does not make you fulfilled, like you did, or like I did, at a young age, and this can happen at any age, as a child, as a grown-up. It's like when the children in school fall in line with the wrong kids, and then your kids come home and they're fucking like talking about poop and like caca or whatever, and then like you're like, what the fuck? And then you find out that your child is fucking falling in line with the wrong group of people, clearly because of something that's going on at home, clearly because they're being programmed in school to learn about things that they never fucking wanted to learn about in the first place, which also programs people to not know themselves as they grow older, because we've been forced to fucking eat shit our whole lives that we don't even fucking care about.
Yeah. Preach it, preach it. One thing we can't control is, of course, just being young. Because when you're young and you don't have as much life experience as someone who's older, I mean, you can't control that. But I do think that it's important for those young people to really, again, think in terms of cause and effect of, hang on, what reward am I getting from being a part of this group? Like, what need is that serving in me? But what's the negative? What's the downside of being involved with this group? And what's the alternative? What can I do instead that might have not so much of a downside, but will still give me the same, if not greater, upside? And that sort of thinking is really what I think people need to practice a little bit more.
I think that that's definitely something that
Our kids would benefit, like the children of the world would benefit from, when parents can teach them, like whatever group of friends you're falling in line with, make sure that you understand what you're getting from them. Like, are you getting something negative from them? Like, are you getting like egoic pleasure from them? Are you getting, something else? I was never taught to do that, so like I never knew why I hung out with specific people. I just liked them. I just thought that they made me feel good. But why did they make me feel good? I didn't know, because I was never taught. So that would definitely be something that would be super beneficial for kids to grow up with a better sense of who they are, with a better sense of self.
Yeah. At the beginning of this episode, I didn't know exactly what ground we would cover, but I think we've uncovered some really, really valuable insights here. And so if we were to pick a power question of the day, what do you think that would be?
I think it would be, when you think about mastering yourself, what comes to mind?
If you feel like you haven't mastered yourself yet, so like if I were to be like, oh, have you mastered yourself? And in your mind you were like, well, not really, I'd like to do this, or, I'd like to do this. Those are the things that are calling out to you to make your life more quality, a more quality experience. So I think that would be a good power question. What does it take for you to feel like you've mastered yourself?
That's a good one, yeah. And I'd also like to encourage people to do the exercise that you talked about, which was have that inner conversation. You can even write it down.
Yeah.
And I actually learned one time from a licensed therapist that there's a technique to do this called psychosynthesis, or it's called writing out that dialogue almost like it's a movie script, and all these characters in your mind are having this conversation with each other. And I've tried that, and I mean, it's not like it's going to change your life in a minute, but I think it's a good exercise because you do get some insights and you start to see both sides and you start to see the conflicts inside of you. And you start to see that like every character, they have a good role to play. Like you have to have that conversation in order to kind of synthesize yourself. Otherwise, you as a person are split between the various characters of your mind.
If anybody's seen the movie Split, you have all of these different characters and they come to light whenever they want. You don't even know.
Mm-hmm. Totally. All right. That's all for today. Thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you in next week's episode. Did you find at least one gold nugget in today's episode? Then please like and subscribe and share it with a friend. And finally, If you're looking for a community of like-minded people, join our free Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/enterthemind.